There was a time when the world slept earlier. When darkness wasn't something to escape, but something to live inside. Before electricity painted our nights in gold and neon, people knew the true color of night, soft, infinite, and alive with whispers. Imagine a small village wrapped in moonlight, where every sound feels closer, every breath slower. No hum of machines, no ticking of clocks, only the pulse of the earth itself. And this is where our story begins, on a quiet hill, in a village that never knew what a light bulb was. Every evening, when the sun melted behind the trees, the world turned liquid blue. People would finish their chores before dusk, firewood stacked, animals fed, doors closed gently against the coming dark. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full of meaning. Mothers would light small oil lamps, their flickering flames stretching long shadows across mud walls. Old men would sit by the doorway, wrapped in shawls, sharing stories carried from one generation to the next. For them, night wasn't just a pause between days. It was a living thing, something to listen to. Among them lived a young boy named Ayan. Barefoot most days, curious about everything. He loved to watch the flames dance in the lamps, loved how they made his grandmother's stories feel alive. She would tell him about spirits that guarded the village, about stars that were once souls of their ancestors. Ayan would listen, his small eyes glowing with the same fire that burned in the lamp between them. When the wind blew through the cracks of the wooden window, the flame would flicker, and Ayan would imagine it was the spirit his grandmother spoke of, greeting them in silence. Every house in the village had its own rhythm after dark. From far away, if you looked down from the hills, you could see tiny dots of orange light, each one a home, each one a world of its own. Families gathered close. People didn't hide behind walls of distraction or screens. They talked, they listened. Time moved slower, yet felt deeper. The air was thick with stories and smoke. One night, Ayan followed his father outside to the fields. The moon hung full and round above the wheat, silvering every blade of grass. His father carried a lantern, its glass stained from years of soot. "Hold this," he told Ayan, handing it over carefully. Ayan held it close, marveling at the small flame that somehow chased away the endless dark. "Do you know, Ayan," his father said softly, "this flame is older than us. Our fathers and their fathers used the same light to work, to pray, to find their way home." Ayan didn't understand it then. But he felt something stir inside him, a quiet connection to something much bigger than himself. As they walked through the fields, the world around them was hushed except for the soft chirping of crickets. The stars above looked close enough to touch. There was no sound of motors, no glow from distant towns, only silence and sky. The kind of silence that doesn't scare you, the kind that feels like a friend. When they reached the end of the field, Ayan's father stopped and turned off the lantern. The world went black. At first, Ayan's heart raced. But then, slowly, his eyes adjusted. He saw the faint silver of the moon, the faint outlines of the hills, the soft shimmer of dew on the wheat. "See," his father whispered. "Even without fire, the night gives its own light." Ayan smiled, realizing that darkness wasn't the enemy everyone thought it was. It was simply another kind of light, softer, quieter, more honest. Later that night, back at home, his grandmother was waiting by the lamp. She told him a story she said was as old as the stars. About a time when the night spoke to people. When dreams were not distractions but messages. When men and women could tell time by the song of insects and the glow of the moon. Once, she said, people didn't need clocks. They listened to the world. The night told them everything. Ayan looked at her, unsure if she meant it literally. But in her eyes, he saw that she believed it. Outside, the village was asleep. The only sound was the crackle of oil burning slowly in the lamp. The air smelled of wood smoke, warm milk, and silence. Hours passed, and Ayan's grandmother hummed an old lullaby, a tune without words, just notes carried on breath. He lay down near her feet, his mind wandering between dreams and wakefulness. And for the first time, he noticed how beautiful darkness could be. Days turned to weeks, and weeks to seasons. The rhythm of life in the village never changed. People rose with the sun and rested when the light faded. The night was both their blanket and their clock. But one evening, a traveler arrived, a man from the city, carrying something no one had ever seen before. It was a small machine, round and strange, with wires like veins and a bulb of clear glass. The traveler called it light. The villagers gathered in awe as he turned a crank, and suddenly, the bulb glowed. A hush fell over the crowd. It wasn't firelight. It didn't flicker, didn't breathe. It was steady, bright, almost blinding. Children covered their eyes. The old men murmured among themselves. Ayan stared in disbelief. It was beautiful, but it didn't feel alive. The traveler laughed proudly, saying, "This is the future. One day, every home will have this. No more oil, no more smoke, no more darkness." Some clapped. Some didn't. That night, as the villagers discussed what they'd seen, Ayan's grandmother sat silently. Her eyes reflected the lamp's flickering flame. Finally, she said softly, "When you chase away all the darkness, you also chase away what it teaches." Ayan didn't understand what she meant, not yet. But he remembered her words. Over the next few days, the traveler stayed in the village, showing people his invention. Children followed him everywhere. The men asked questions, the women admired the clean light that didn't smell of oil or smoke. And slowly, curiosity began to replace wonder. Ayan's father built a small shed for the traveler to rest in. Ayan visited him every day, helping carry his tools, trying to understand the magic behind the glowing bulb. "It's not magic," the man said once, smiling. "It's called electricity. It's power." Ayan liked the sound of that word, power. But he didn't know how something invisible could be so strong. That night, Ayan looked at his family sitting in the lamplight. The room felt softer, the shadows danced on the walls. He looked at the lamp and whispered to himself, "But this too is power, isn't it?" He didn't tell anyone, but part of him wished the village would stay the same, quiet, slow, full of mystery. Because even as he was fascinated by the traveler's light, he could feel something changing. The nights no longer felt the same. The silence that once held stories now held questions. The darkness that once comforted now felt fragile. Still, life went on. And one evening, as the traveler prepared to leave, he promised Ayan, "One day, you'll see these lights everywhere. The night will never be this dark again." He smiled as if it were a blessing. But Ayan wasn't sure. That night, after the traveler was gone, the village returned to its usual rhythm. Lamps burned, fires crackled, stars shimmered. Ayan sat by his grandmother, who was gazing into the flame. "Do you think he's right?" Ayan asked. "That soon there will be no darkness left?" His grandmother sighed. "Maybe. But remember this, the night hides many things that the light can never show." Outside, a soft wind blew through the wheat fields, whispering through the cracks of the old wooden house. The lamp flickered gently, its flame bending but not breaking. Ayan watched it for a long time. And deep in his heart, he knew something had shifted, a change he couldn't name yet, but one that would define everything that came after. Because when light arrives, darkness doesn't disappear. It simply hides, waiting for those who still remember how to listen. Years passed like wind slipping through old wooden doors. The traveler's strange glowing bulb became a distant memory, a story told to children the way Ayan's grandmother once told stories about the stars. But memories, like seeds, have their own way of growing. Ayan grew older. His hands grew calloused from the fields, his mind curious about the world beyond the hills. Sometimes, at night, he still sat by the same oil lamp, watching the flame flicker and twist, remembering the traveler's machine. He would wonder, what if that light really could change everything? His grandmother was older now, her eyes clouded, her voice quieter. But her words still carried warmth. "Never forget the night, Ayan," she would say. "It's where dreams breathe." Then, one summer evening, a sound filled the village, a soft hum unlike anything they'd heard before. The men from the nearby town had arrived. carrying tall poles and coiled wires that shone like silver snakes. They said they were bringing electric lines. Children ran behind them, shouting and laughing, while the elders watched in silence. Ayan stood among them, his heart caught between excitement and unease. By nightfall, the poles stood like sentinels across the fields. The men promised that soon, the whole village would glow like the city. "You'll never have to light a lamp again," they said proudly. And that night, for the first time, the village didn't fall into complete darkness. A single bulb, hanging from a wire in the square, flickered on. The people gasped. The light was harsh, bright, unblinking. It poured over the ground like water, washing away the deep shadows that once lived there. The air itself felt different, thinner, restless. Children clapped. Some elders smiled weakly. A few turned away. Ayan stood still, his face half in shadow. He felt something break quietly inside him. The lamp's flame that once told stories had been replaced by a light that told nothing at all. In the days that followed, more bulbs appeared, in homes, in streets, in corners where darkness once curled like a cat. People stayed awake longer now. The soft rhythm of life changed. Nights grew shorter, not because the sun returned sooner, but because people refused to sleep. Conversations that once ended by firelight stretched late into the night. Children stopped listening to old tales. The stars above were still there, but few looked up anymore. The new light was enough. The oil lamps were put away, their glass chimneys collecting dust. The smell of smoke that once filled the air vanished, replaced by the faint hum of wires. Ayan's father said it was progress. His grandmother said it was forgetting. Ayan said nothing. He watched his village transform, the way a field changes after a storm, alive, yet unfamiliar. There was laughter, yes. There was comfort. But there was also something missing, something you could feel only in silence. One night, Ayan walked alone to the hill above the village, the same hill where he once carried his father's lantern. The valley below was glowing. Every house was lit, every shadow gone. It should have been beautiful. But standing there, he realized how much darker the sky looked. The stars seemed smaller, weaker, as if pushed away by the new brightness. He closed his eyes and tried to remember how the world used to sound when it was quiet, the chirping of crickets, the whisper of wind, the crackle of a lamp's flame. But the silence he found now felt different. Hollow. Behind him, footsteps. It was his grandmother, walking slowly with a stick in her hand. "You came to see the lights too?" she asked gently. He nodded. "Yes, but I don't know if I like them." She smiled, her eyes reflecting both pride and sorrow. "Light is a gift, Ayan. But only when it doesn't blind us." They stood there for a long time, watching the glowing village below. The air was cool, the night thin. "Do you remember," she whispered, "how we used to listen to the night breathe?" Ayan nodded. "I remember everything." Her hand trembled as she reached out to touch his. "Then promise me one thing. Don't let the world make you forget the dark. There's truth in it. There's peace in it." He promised. The next morning, his grandmother was gone. She passed quietly in her sleep, her lamp still burning beside her, the last flame in the village. For days, Ayan couldn't bring himself to touch it. He kept it lit, the small wick burning lower and lower, as though it carried her spirit. And when it finally went out, he didn't replace it with a bulb. He simply let the night take the room again, just as she would have wanted. Months passed. The world outside changed even faster. Radios arrived, then machines that played moving pictures. People began staying indoors more often, their faces lit not by fire but by screens. The laughter was still there, but softer. The songs of the night faded behind walls of electric hum. Ayan grew into a man. He worked as a teacher, teaching children who had never known darkness, children who believed night was meant to be lit. He often told them stories of a time when people lived by moonlight, when families gathered around a single flame and spoke in whispers so the night could listen. The children would laugh and call it old-fashioned. "That sounds scary," they'd say. But sometimes, when the power failed and the lights went out, their laughter stopped. The room filled with a quiet they'd never heard before, and for a few moments, they would listen. Really listen. And Ayan would smile. Because in that silence, he could almost hear his grandmother's voice again. Years turned to decades. The village grew into a town. Roads were paved, wires multiplied, and the once black night sky became pale with constant glow. Fireflies disappeared. The stars faded behind the haze. But somewhere on the edge of town, in an old house where the paint had peeled and the walls still smelled of smoke, Ayan kept a single oil lamp. He didn't light it often, only on nights when the world felt too loud. When machines roared and people rushed. On those nights, he would close the windows, light the lamp, and sit by it just as he did when he was a boy. The flame would dance, shadows would stretch, and for a while, he would feel time slow down again. In those moments, he wasn't a man of the new world. He was a child of the old one, listening to the language of darkness. One night, a storm rolled over the town. The power went out, every bulb, every streetlight, every machine went silent. The whole valley fell into darkness for the first time in years. From his window, Ayan saw people step outside, confused, holding candles and phones. For the first time, the stars returned, clear, bright, endless. He smiled, whispering to himself, "You never left, did you?" He walked outside, lamp in hand, and saw children pointing at constellations they'd never seen before. Families gathered in courtyards, talking softly, laughing by candlelight. The night, for a moment, felt alive again. Ayan stood quietly, letting the darkness wrap around him like an old friend. The wind carried the scent of wet earth, the sound of distant thunder. And somewhere, faintly, he could almost hear his grandmother's lullaby carried on the rain. When the power finally returned hours later, people cheered. Lights blinked back to life. But for Ayan, something stayed. A memory, a lesson, that the night never really left. It only waited for people to remember how to see it. And as he blew out the lamp's small flame, he whispered, "Thank you, old friend." The room went dark. Peaceful. Still. Outside, the stars shimmered like they always had, patient, ancient, and quietly waiting for the world to slow down again. Time has a strange way of moving, fast for those who chase it, gentle for those who listen. For Ayan, the years slipped through his fingers like sand warmed by the sun. The world around him had changed beyond recognition. The quiet village of his childhood had become a small city now, restless and loud, its skyline stitched with wires and glowing towers. The nights no longer fell quietly. They arrived blinking and buzzing, flooded with light so bright it erased even the faintest trace of darkness. The moon was still there, somewhere above the clouds, but its glow could barely reach the ground. Ayan, now an old man, lived alone in the same small house his father had built. The walls still held the scent of wood smoke, though no fire had burned there in years. On his shelf sat the old oil lamp, blackened glass, chipped base, the wick long replaced. It hadn't been lit since the storm years ago. Yet every evening, as the artificial light filled his street, he would glance toward it and feel something stir quietly inside. He often sat by the window and watched the people passing outside. Children with glowing screens in their hands. Neighbors talking to someone far away but not to each other. Everyone seemed connected, yet somehow lonelier. Sometimes, when the noise became too much, Ayan would close his eyes and try to hear the world beneath it all, the slow breath of the wind, the rhythm of crickets, the faint hum of life that once sang in every night. But it was faint now, like a forgotten song. And still, he remembered. He remembered the warmth of the lamp's light on his grandmother's face, the gentle way his father turned off the lantern to show him the moon. He remembered the silence, not the kind that feels empty, but the kind that feels whole. Now, every sound seemed sharp. Every light seemed rushed. The night had lost its patience, and with it, people had lost something too, something that didn't have a name. One afternoon, as the sky turned amber, Ayan received a visit. A young girl stood at his door, thin, curious, her eyes full of that restless energy only youth carries. She was his neighbor's daughter, maybe 10 years old. "Grandfather Ayan," she said softly, "my teacher says you used to live before electricity. Is that true?" He smiled, amused. "Yes, child. I did." Her eyes widened. "Then, what did people do at night?" Ayan laughed gently. "We lived," he said. "We talked. We dreamed. We listened." The girl frowned, not understanding. "But wasn't it scary? So dark everywhere?" He looked out the window, the street lamps already flickering on, erasing the twilight. "No, little one. It wasn't scary. Darkness was like music without words. You didn't need to see everything to feel safe. You only needed to feel the world breathing with you." She tilted her head. "I don't think I've ever seen real dark." Her words stayed with him long after she left. Never seen real dark. That night, he couldn't sleep. He looked out again, the world gleaming cold and artificial. It was then he decided something. A small idea, quiet but certain. He reached for the old oil lamp, dusted it carefully, trimmed its wick, and poured fresh oil inside, oil he kept for years, waiting for a reason to use it again. Then he turned off every light in the house. For the first time in decades, darkness returned. He lit the lamp. The flame rose weakly at first, then steadied, spreading its warm golden glow across the room. Shadows stretched long and alive again, trembling softly on the walls. And suddenly, time folded back. He wasn't old anymore. He was that same barefoot boy sitting beside his grandmother, listening to stories under the hush of night. The smell of burning oil filled the air. The silence deepened until he could hear the tiny crackle of the flame, the pulse of his own heart, the sigh of the wind against the window. He felt tears gather quietly in his eyes, not of sadness, but of remembering. He whispered, "You're still here." The next evening, when the young girl came again, she found Ayan sitting by the lamp. "What is that?" she asked, stepping closer. "This," he said softly, "is the first light I ever knew." She stared at it, mesmerized. The flame danced gently, alive in a way no bulb ever could. "It's so pretty," she whispered. "It moves." "Yes," Ayan said, smiling. "It breathes. Like we do." She sat on the floor beside him. "Can I stay here? Just for a while?" He nodded. "Of course." Together they watched the flame flicker. Outside, the street buzzed with light and noise, but in that small room, time seemed to pause. The girl didn't look at her glowing screen once. She just sat, her face calm, eyes reflecting the gentle gold of the lamp. After a long silence, she asked, "Did everyone have one of these?" "Everyone," Ayan said. It was more than a light. It was a reason for families to sit together. People shared stories, laughter, silence. The flame didn't just show our faces, it showed our hearts. She smiled faintly. "I wish I lived then." Ayan looked at her and said, "You still can, if you remember to turn off the lights sometimes." From that night on, the girl began visiting him often. They would sit by the lamp, and Ayan would tell her stories, not of kings or battles, but of ordinary things, how people found comfort in the sound of rain, how they watched the stars for direction, how they could read the night like a book. And slowly, the girl began to understand. Weeks passed. Ayan's health began to fade. He spoke less, slept more. But every night, he made sure the lamp was lit. The flame became his companion, quiet, patient, always waiting. One cold night, as the wind howled outside, the girl knocked on his door. No answer. She pushed it open. The room was still. Ayan sat in his chair by the window, eyes closed, a faint smile on his lips. The lamp beside him burned steadily, its flame small but strong. She stepped closer and touched his hand. It was cool. Beside him was a note, his handwriting trembling but clear. It read, "When the night feels too bright, turn off the lights. Sit with the darkness. Listen. The world still has things to tell you. If you remember how to be quiet. The girl read it again and again, tears sliding down her cheeks. Then, carefully, she refilled the lamp's oil and kept it burning. Outside, the city glowed like a sea of white fire. But in that one old house, a softer light flickered, golden, alive, remembering. Years later, the girl grew up. She became a teacher, just like Ayan once was. In her classroom, she taught children about history, about inventions, about the wonders of the modern world. But sometimes, she turned off the lights and told them stories of what came before, stories of nights that breathed, of lamps that sang, of people who once listened to the world instead of watching it. She called it nights before electricity. And when the power went out one day during a storm, her students laughed nervously, unsure of what to do. She smiled, took out the same oil lamp, the one she had kept all those years, and lit it. The flame flickered, filling the room with soft gold. Now, she whispered, listen. The children fell silent. Outside, the wind sighed. Somewhere distant, thunder rolled. Inside, the little flame swayed gently, painting their faces in light and shadow. And in that quiet moment, the world slowed again, just for a breath, just for a heartbeat, as if the past had reached out through time to touch the present. The flame crackled, alive. Someone exhaled softly. No one spoke. No one needed to. Because the night had returned, not to scare them, but to remind them that not all darkness is absence. Some of it is memory. Some of it is peace. And somewhere, deep in its silence, our ancestors still whisper, waiting for us to turn off the lights and listen.